Cornucopia Radio presents.
Life's full of uncertainty when you work deep undercover. Who's she? Who's he? Is she a bad guy? Is he a bad guy? If so, are they capable of harming me? Capable of violence? Who am I? Are you two people, or does one take over from the other? It's an enigma. I don't know the answer, but I know it fascinates some people. They've told me as much. Some venues are more comfortable than others. Some places I could sense it was possible to relax, but only to a degree. Other places I had to be constantly mentally vigilant. Then you must deal with substances that mess with your head. Alcohol and cannabis all change one's perceptions of reality. Have you ever been so drunk or stoned you end up fearful of making some big faux pas, like telling the boss to fuck off? Chances are you have, or at least most of us have. Now, think of that feeling and multiply it by 1,000. It just gives you an inkling of the sheer willpower needed to concentrate while undercover to avoid slip-ups. The truth is, I could never allow a conflict to take place in my head, whether sober or not. I had to forget Steve Bentley and become totally immersed in the psyche of Steve Jackson. I could not afford a slip-up. My life may have been in danger. On June 10th, 1976, we met Blue and Mac. They were in the New Inn and we got into conversation with them. We didn't know then that Blue was to play a big part in our undercover future. An exciting part. And, on one occasion, a downright scary part. The following podcast is brought to you by True Crime Investigators UK. But who are they? John was a police officer for 30 years, working locally and nationally as a detective. Sally was also a police officer for 12 years, and then retrained as a lawyer and practiced in criminal law. Now they're both retired and review cases of interest, some solved, some undetected. Throughout this series, they'll discuss the cases they're reviewing and interview relevant parties including police officers, suspects, witnesses, and experts. The next case for review is the counter-drug investigation Operation Julie, which took place in the mid-70s, and an interview with one of the undercover agents involved in the investigation, Stephen Bentley.
Well, welcome back to the show, everybody, and we hope you're enjoying listening to the story of Operation Julie and the role that Stephen Bentley played in that operation. We're both really fascinated by undercover policing, aren't we?
Oh, definitely. The topic is in the media all the time at the moment for various reasons, and going back all those years, it's still anything with intrigue and undercover operations is always sought after, isn't it?
Yeah, so we hope that by bringing the story of this investigation to the podcast, that people that are listening will find it as exciting, as compelling, as interesting as we do. But if you're joining us for the first time, we better tell you where we are with the story. So do you want to give a brief overview, John?
Yeah, the first part we covered was the premises known as Plas Lissin, which is a large house in mid-Wales where, at the start of Operation Julie, it was suspected that in those premises was a illegal LSD manufacturing laboratory, and Stephen Bentley and others were tasked with doing observations and some surveillance work there to see what actually was going off. There was activity. Unfortunately, the activity ceased and they left the premises before any arrests were made, but that was the start of the operation.
And I think from then on, Stephen moved on to Llandowie Brefi, where he got an undercover buddy, Eric, who he met for the first time, and then they went to Llandowie Brefi. Their target was a man called Alston Hughes, who was also known as Smiles, for obvious reasons.
Yes, after the laboratory had shut down and moved away, the next phase was the start of what really is the undercover police work, which was sort of very new at that time, and certainly to the extent that Stephen and Eric carried out. And that was where the infiltration took place, as we hear, with Smiles.
So before we go back to Stephen, so that he can explain what came next, shall we do a little detour? Because although it's important for an undercover officer to have a believable and feasible cover story for his undercover life, there's also got to be a story for the life that he's left. People back at the police station, people that he worked with.
Yes, I mean, by the nature of being a police officer, you're nosy.
Nosy.
And nosy, and obviously got an inquiry mind. And when people, if it happened and it doesn't happen in that way, they just disappear into thin air, you'd ask the question where they've gone. So although you have cover stories for the operational work outside the police station, you've also got to give an explanation as to where that officer has gone, in particular Stephen Bentley.
Well, we thought we ought to try and contact somebody who knew Stephen at that time, a work colleague, and ask them where they thought he'd gone and why he wasn't around for such a long time. So I think, John, it's time to pick the phone up again.
Yep, my name is Eddie Reid, and I was a member of the Hampshire Constabulary from 1975 until 1983. Steve was a Liverpool lad and a big Liverpool FC fan. And the first time I met him was actually in the canteen at Woodchurch. But when I began to speak, Steve paid a lot more attention to my accent than I expected him to. And I later realised that his father was from Glasgow as well, from Govan, in fact. And Steve understood every single word that I said because of that. Because he was a Liverpool fan, he never actually called me Eddie at any time. He always called me Kenny, after his Liverpool hero, Kenny Dalglish. But we always got on very well. And then it was in early 1976, I realised that I hadn't seen him for a while, and no, he didn't call me Kenny in ages. So I spoke to Detective Sergeant Alan Stovall, who was also my next door neighbour, and I just asked him where Steve was. I hadn't seen him for a while. And he replied, he's on a course, that's all he said. And I found that quite surprising because he was a highly regarded detective, and I couldn't understand what he would benefit from any type of course. But I just left it at that and thought no more about it.
How long was Stephen actually, if I use the word missing, how long was he missing for?
Well, it was almost a year, and it was an early. But because we were a subdivisional station, we had every daily newspaper delivered to the station as a matter of course. And it was in early 1977 that the newspapers arrived, and one of our section officers took them upstairs to put in the canteen. And he noticed on the front page was a story about a massive drugs operation in Wales. And he flicked through the rest of the papers, and every single newspaper carried the story. Some were middle-page spreads, and others were front-page news. And that was the first time that Operation Julia came to public notice, really.
And was it from the photographs that were in the newspaper that you recognised Stephen as being one of the undercover officers?
Yes, it was. It was later in the day I came on duty, and I looked through one of the papers, and it was a centre-page spread, and there was a photograph of two guys who looked for all the world like hippies, and I recognised Steve straight away. Instead of being the clean-cut guy that I knew him as, he had long hair and a beard and a woolly hat. He just looked like a hippie. And I then realised that he hadn't been on a course at all. He'd been in part of this Operation Julie.
How did you feel when you saw the newspapers carrying the story of Operation Julie and Stephen being very much part of it?
Well, I was very proud of him, to be honest. We got on really well, and I hadn't seen him for a year. And when I realised where it had actually been, I was absolutely astonished, and I was very proud of him.
Because that kind of operation back in the mid-70s was very unusual, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. I mean, that operation was probably the biggest operation that had taken place anywhere at that time, and it was huge news.
And the absence of Stephen was covered by people saying he'd gone on a course. We now know why, and it was a security issue, wasn't it? That clearly nobody could know other than a handful of people what he was doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously the detective sergeant Alan Stovall at Woodchurch, he knew, And it was him I asked, but he didn't tell me any more than he was on a course. That's all he said. He didn't enlarge on it, and I didn't question it.
And do you keep in touch with him now?
Yeah, I've kept in touch with him probably the last maybe 4 or 5 years. I've been in touch with him because he's out in the Philippines now, and we converse by email frequently. And he still calls me Kenny.
It's not unusual, is it, that people come and go at police stations? People move on to a different station. People can even change forces, and sometimes they're seconded onto other units.
No, the general public will see a uniformed police officer either on the beat or in a police car, and quite rightly imagine that's what the police do. But behind all that is numerous different departments of CID and squads and drug squads and all sorts of different things, where at some stage everybody has to serve in uniform when they join, certainly at that time, and then move on and go to different areas. So it isn't unusual that people move about, they even change forces, as you say, Stephen did. So to disappear with an explanation is quite accepted. Where it would be odd is if somebody just disappeared and nobody knew where they'd gone or saw them anywhere around the station or the areas where they're working, hence why a cover story's given. And in this case, it was to go on a training course, which would have been accepted, and as time goes by, it just drifts into reality.
And I think it's fair to say that the officers that work undercover, they come from the rank and file of the force, don't they?
At that time, certainly, it was, as we keep saying, it was a new thing, really, to do it to this extent and for so long. So at that time, officers were just, sort of volunteered or were rung up because they were deemed to be suitable, as in this case, Dick Lee, the inspector, rang Stephen Bentley and asked to see him, and knew him, knew his background, obviously assessed the fact that he was a bright guy and was capable of doing it, and that at that time was the process that it went through. So one day he'd be in the drug squad or CID, and then eventually transferred onto this and similar inquiries.
But I think even today, the way that you look at undercover officers, they are regular people with regular lives. So they've got partners and boyfriends and girlfriends and wives and husbands and children. And that can be more of an issue, leaving behind your normal home life has got to be far more difficult than leaving behind your work colleague's life. And although other professions go away from home and leave family behind, such as the military or long-distance lorry drivers, pilots, diplomats, coach drivers, all that kind of thing. But the unique thing about an undercover police officer is that he doesn't just physically leave his family, he mentally and emotionally has to leave them behind, because he's got to reinvent himself, hasn't he, as somebody else, and be a different person and live a different life. And that must be really difficult, living that life, who you are and who you have to be.
Well, at that time, as we have mentioned, that it was a new direction the police went into, undercover policing, certainly to the extent and the length of the deployment of Stephen and Eric and others. And of course, at that time, nobody knew how long this operation was going to last. It could have been a very short one, very long one, and as it turned out, it was quite a length of time, and the effects on their personal life became profound and a problem in the end. And of course, you know, as you rightly say, you live in two people, your home life, and also this person that's been invented and deployed into the Welsh hillsides to try and infiltrate a drug gang. So it's very complex and very difficult, and certainly not easy to do.
Well, we're going to go back to Stephen now, and it's fair to say that there was an unexpected turn of events that saw Stephen and Eric travelling to Liverpool with a character from Llandowie Brefi who was known as Blue, and it was in Liverpool that they had quite a scary encounter.
I understand that as well as Operation Julie, there was a spin-off that took you to Liverpool with Blue, which was unexpected but helped to establish your credentials, if you like, with the community in Wales. What actually happened?
What happened was this character, Blue, the hippie character that I'd mentioned before, he knew Smiles very well, and he introduced us to a lot of characters in Mid Wales, all around the Tregaron, Llandowie Brefi area. And one day we were around at Blue's house. He just moved from the cottage he was renting close to Smiles. He'd moved to a much bigger place in a little village called Cillian, which is not too far from Llandowie Brefi. And Blue was, unusually for him, he was in a very agitated state. He eventually asked us for a lift up to Liverpool. So we obviously queried why Liverpool. He said, I've got to meet my Canadian mate there. He said he spends most of his time in Miami, but he's actually from Vancouver. And he gave us this background on a guy that he called Bill, being a pal of his. And he said he's in the UK, he's been to the Isle of Man, he's flown in from the Isle of Man to Liverpool, and he's been looking for a very fast motorboat, MTB, I think he called it. But the thing that interested us was when he mentioned MTBs, fast boats, we thought, oh wow, this could be something, because fast boats are often used for importing drugs, where one leg of the importation is to drop it in the Ogden, in the ocean, and then the boat goes out very speedily, very fast boat, goes out and picks up the contraband in the water and brings it ashore to be distributed to whichever country it's been landed in. So that in itself was of great interest to us, and we readily agreed to go to Liverpool and meet his friend Bill. So when we did, of course, me being effectively from Liverpool, I say effectively, I wasn't born there, but was raised in Liverpool from the age of 12 months of age. And had only left Liverpool in the early 70s, and this was 1976. So I was more than a little bit apprehensive going back to my roots in Liverpool, undercover, thinking, oh my goodness, I hope somebody doesn't recognise me. Anyway, long story, we took him in the van up to Liverpool, and that had its first hairy moment was just after we came out the Mersey Tunnel. I was driving and saw the blue lights, the police car, and it stopped us, gave us a bit of a grilling because we looked like members of a rock band with the long hair and the denims and the beards, all three of us. And I'm thinking, oh goodness, I hope nobody's got any drugs on board. I know I didn't, and I'm confident Eric didn't, but I wasn't sure about Blue. So, but anyway, he didn't search us, but he did a PNC check. The PNC, I think, had come into existence, Police National Computer, for those that are wondering what that stands for. That had come into being not that long before, but I was aware that the PNC was now fully operational. And of course, Eric and I had these aliases, our cover names, and we had the false driver's licenses and the false criminal records. So we gave him our details, the policeman our details, and he didn't like the look of us at all. He gave us a clean bill of health because there was nothing, we weren't wanted or anything like that. So we set off again. This was in Lime Street, if anybody knows Liverpool. It's the big, one of the big thoroughfares in Liverpool, in the city centre, near the railway station, near the famous hotel, the Adelphi Hotel. But the place that Bill was staying in was a little rundown place called the Feathers. So we went into the Feathers Hotel, Blue asked for Bill. And we went up to his room, met Bill in his room, and we didn't really talk to him. It was Blue and Bill catching up on old times. And, he spoke in this very strong Canadian/American accent. It was clear they were old buddies, and Bill was there on his bed and he was drinking really, really hard. Offered us some booze. I think it was Bacardi, but I can't remember exactly now. But we drank quite a bit with him, and all of a sudden he announced, "That's it, let's have a change of scenery." So off we went. We had a couple of pints in a bar nearby and ended up in an Indian restaurant in Bold Street. That's where Bill first started talking to us about his plan to import cocaine into the UK, and big quantities. Reckoned he knew the main guy in Bolivia, and he was shipping loads of it into America and to Canada via Miami. And he wanted to set up a new operation importing it into the UK, into Britain. So we talked about it a little bit there, but Blue tried to hush him up. But Bill was he was quite a character, strong character. He wasn't for hushing up for too long. And we ended up going to a nightclub called the She Club. Bill managed to drop one of the bouncers a good few quid. I think it was about 20 quid, which was a lot of money in those days, to make sure we got in. So in we went. And as the night progressed, I actually got on the dance floor. For some crazy reason, I decided to dance barefooted, and a young lady joined me saying something to the effect of, "Oh, I've always wanted to dance with somebody that dances barefooted." I said, "Well, there you are. Now you've got your chance." So we were dancing for a while, went back to the table. I could see Eric and Blue and Bill were in earnest conversation. And Eric turned round to me as I arrived at the table and said to Bill, "I don't know." He said, "Ask him." So I'm thinking, what the hell are they on about? So Bill came out with it even more directly. He spelt out the details of this cocaine importation and said, "Can you do it?" So I kind of went along with the role and said, thought about it for a minute or two. I said, "Yeah, it's a possibility. It could be a goer, yeah. Depends on a few things." Then all of a sudden his mood switched completely. And he glared at me, and he just said, out of the blue, he just said, "Are you guys cops?" So I thought about it for a split second, and I decided to react in a humorous way, and just laughed at him and said something. I can't repeat what I said, but it's in the book because it involves some very bad language. Then all of a sudden, he went all stony-faced again, and he put his two fingers together and put them against my head, like imitating a gun. And he just went, "Well, if you guys are." And then he just went, "Pop." And then he was silent. And I tell you what, it was scary, very, very scary. And then just after that, the girl that I'd been dancing with, she was with her mate. They were both nurses in Liverpool on their night out, and they came back to the table. So the whole mood changed again, and we carried on talking small talk until Blue, Bill, Eric, and myself, and the two girls, we all ended up going to some shebeen, illegal drinking club, not too far from Bold Street. I can't remember exactly where it was, where we got a bite to eat and a few more drinks. So now, I don't know, it's getting to about, I don't know, it must be 6 a.m. Eventually I crash in my bed and thinking, bloody hell, that was quite a performance. Trying to remember everything that was said to us. Again, long story short, we headed back, all of us, minus the girls, we headed back in the van. So that's me, Eric, Blue, and Bill in the van, because the plan was for them to rent a car in a nearby place, nearby village. Some farmer rented out cars, so the Blue knew. So that was the plan. They were going to rent a car, and they were going to go onto the south coast, Poole and Southampton, looking for this motorboat, because the story was that Bill had sold a boat recently for a considerable amount of money, so he had money to spend on on a boat that he wanted to obviously use for the drug trade. And so we drove all the way back, and he carried on talking about what the deal was, and he was spelling out the amounts that were going to be involved, how much it was going to be. I think, if I remember rightly, it was something like 24,000 US dollars a kilo, with sliding scale for quantity discounts and that sort of thing. And again, he kind of did the stony face thing again, and threatened us with, any rip-offs and da-da-da. So basically what he was trying to say to us was, I want you guys involved, but can you come up with somebody who's got that kind of money to be the main man in the UK? So we dropped him at the farm to get the rental car, and then we found out that they planned an overnight stop in Bristol. We'd already said that we were going on to Bristol. We didn't say why after we dropped them off. And that was a mistake, because we actually ended up leading them into Bristol, and they were following us. We were in the van in front, and they were in this rental car behind. And, we were kind of crapping ourselves, thinking, I wonder if the van's been bugged or whatever. We were meowing to each other and, silent gestures, this, that, and the other. It was like quite really scary. Anyway, eventually we dropped them off at the bottom of the M32. Eric gave them directions, and they left, and we jumped back in a van. But before we went to Eric's house, of course, he lived in the suburbs of Bristol, we adopted every anti-surveillance measure known to man in case they were following us. They weren't. So we went back to Eric's, saw Jan, his partner, and revisited the whole episode. It was very scary indeed. So obviously it warranted a visit into Devizes the next day to see Dick Lee. And Dick Lee didn't know what to make of it. We went through it, chapter and verse, the whole story, didn't leave anything out, gave him the whole story, quantities, prices. And again, I can't repeat on a podcast exactly what Dick Lee said, but the second word was me, and the first word began with F. So, effectively what he was saying was we'd given him a headache, because there we are investigating this massive LSD network, and here, there's Eric and I. We've stumbled into this huge conspiracy to import very serious quantities of cocaine into the UK from Bolivia via Miami. So Dick Lee's brief then in relation to the cocaine was just string them along, string Blue along, really, which is what we did. We did that for several weeks, if not a couple of 3 months. Every time we saw Blue, there were some serious discussions. And, we kept stringing him along, but he was quite happy. He just said, well, do it when you can. And he came out with quite a lot more detail. And on one occasion, we visited him to string him along. We thought we'd reinforce our credentials a little bit more, and we'd borrowed some confiscated hashish from the Bristol drugstore and a sawn-off shotgun, and we secreted those in a hidden compartment in the back of the van. So as we were leaving Blue, talking about the cocaine thing, Eric said, "Oh, come and have a look at this," like all casual. So Blue came out, nosy, wondering what Eric's got to show him. So he showed him about, I don't know what it was, 13 great big packages, I think, or £13. 13 seems to stick into my head. 13 pounds of Lebanese hashish and a sawn-off shotgun. So it was Blue's turn to go F me. So, it really established the whole Blue and the whole Liverpool, the cocaine thing, really helped establish our credentials in that area, and particularly with Smiles.
Did anything ever come of the deal or the characters involved, or did you just leave it?
No, that's an excellent question, because, we were told to string Blue out, in other words, the cocaine thing out. And as I've said, that's what we did. And eventually, Dick Lee had to make a decision. And what he actually told me was that the whole cocaine thing was handed over to the DEA, and that both Blue and Bill ended up serving a lot of time in a federal penitentiary in the US.
I mean, having been involved in similar operations, your hands are full with what you've got on the go without taking more on. And I can understand the DEA, the Drugs Enforcement Agency from America, would have taken it on board and dealt with it, which seems to be the case, doesn't it?
Yeah, that's right, especially seeing there was the Miami connections and the connection to South American cartel, Bolivia in this case and not Colombia. But yeah, it all makes sense. And of course, Bill had these connections to Miami, to Vancouver. The other thing I failed to mention was that he bragged to us that he called himself a fixer, really. He said he was in with a load of lawyers and doctors and dentists and that type of people, professional, who put up the money for these massive drug buys. And, obviously they never went anywhere near it, and neither did he. That's what he was telling us about, that he never went near the product itself. He kind of just fixed things, made things happen. And it all makes sense. I mean, you know how it works, and I'm sure a lot of people do, from reading newspapers, reading books, and watching TV films or films at the cinema. That's there's always a Mr. Big. So there was a strong American, Canadian, Florida, Miami, Florida, South American connection. So it was no big surprise that the Drug Enforcement Agency took it all over eventually. As I've said, we had enough on our plate.
Well, that's a story and a half, isn't it? The Liverpool aspect, and it's interesting, isn't it, that even then, even going back to the 1970s, that this was worldwide. There were other countries and other networks being involved in the importation, exportation, distribution, circulation of drugs. So even though that LSD was being manufactured in the UK, we have got other countries involved, Bolivia with the cocaine, but it doesn't just involve Bolivia and where it ends up. It's going via other countries as well. So a global network.
Well, we've got to bear in mind that these drug dealers, obviously LSD, were interested in Operation Julie, was manufactured here mainly, although it is manufactured in other parts of the world. But when you get into the drug dealing world and other criminality involving anything you can think of, stolen property, diamonds or whatever, gold bars, it's all traded around the world exactly the same as legitimate businesses based in London and other parts of all the major cities in the world. It's all the same thing. They're trading legitimately, whereas the criminals trade illegally. And of course, one product leads to another, and contacts are made exactly the same as a private company.
And it just goes to show you, doesn't it, that the end point is, it might be a small-time dealer walking into a pub and handing over a wrap. That might be the end point. But it's what goes on before you get to that end point. Different countries, different networks, risks involved, even corruption.
Yes, the product itself that came to the UK, I mean, the LSD was manufactured here, which was a chemical process, but other drugs, cocaine, heroin, are grown and come from Asia and other parts of South America. And it's the same, going back to how I look at it as a business. You have a manufacturing base, a supply and sales department that move this product on throughout the world, and eventually it ends up in a pub in any town and city in this country. But there is a supply line, and of course that involves people exchanging money or whatever for that product and making a profit out of it. And that's the basics of what the criminal world lives on.
Yeah, but just going back to Stephen and Eric's scary moment, if you like, in Liverpool. What do you think about that? Bill holding two fingers up to Stephen's head, and as Stephen described, his mood had changed, and he holds up two fingers to his head and basically says, if you cops, this is what you're gonna get. But I think what he says is he holds the two fingers up as a gun and says pop. I mean, that might be something very quiet and but that's got a huge message behind it, hasn't it?
Well, we've got to bear in mind that these people, on one side, in Stephen's case, are criminals. On his side, they're undercover cops who are both psyching each other out and seeing who blinks first and who makes a mistake and what the mood is, as we've described. And of course, equally, they're tense because they're selling a very expensive product and obviously want to make a lot of money. And not only the police are after them, other agencies, customs, military or whatever, but into rivalry and gangs and robbing each other. So they're aware of that. They live in that world and they know this happens. And equally, both sides are on edge.
Yeah, so really the fact that these gangs carry guns or carry weapons, that might not be because of any police intervention. It might be just to protect themselves from the rivals, from other gangs.
Well, I've never done in my service any undercover police work, but I've been involved in those type of operations on the periphery, so to speak. And gangs carry weapons more than likely to defend themselves against rival gangs robbing them, because, as I say, the product and the money is vast, and at some point the buyer and the seller or their representatives have got to meet and an exchange take place, and at that point they are very vulnerable. If one gang wants to rob the other, that's the point it's going to happen. You're either going to steal the drugs or steal the money. So to protect themselves, that's why the gangs, unfortunately, have grown into what we've got today, very big and powerful, and use violence to protect their turf. They're more worried about getting robbed than possibly by being arrested. You can't go to a police station and say, I've just been robbed of
my drug money.
Of my drug money or my drugs, because they can't. So they take the precautions like they do and carry guns or other weapons and go in numbers.
So I wonder what Smiles and his mates thought about Stephen and Eric's other drug dealings, and if that enhanced their reputation. And certainly that was the question that we asked next, wasn't it?
What effect did it have on Smiles and all the others involved when they learnt that you were sort of getting involved in yet more drug-orientated dealings, and did it enhance your position?
I think it did, without a shadow of a doubt. I mean, it's very difficult it's difficult in some ways to answer that, because it's just not possible. It's impossible to put myself inside the head of somebody else. So I don't know what was going on in Smiles' mind. But I don't think there's any doubt about it that it enhanced our credibility 1,000%. As did other smaller incidents where, I think I was describing earlier how in the pub one day some guys were telling us about a hashish importation scam they were involved in and wanted to know if we wanted to become part of it. So all of these incidents, they kind of all mingled together to enhance our credibility. You add all that up to the fact that we were doing odd jobs, chopping down trees, moving furniture, and purportedly buying and selling cars, which I stress we would have done if called upon to do so. It wouldn't have been a problem. We'd have done it. And I'm sure that Dick Lee Coffers, the Operation Julie coffers, wouldn't have minded if we'd have made the odd £100 profit every now and again on a car deal.
You mentioned the compromise, as it's called, with Bill. Obviously, it's a common to my knowledge, a common thing that people challenge new dealers or criminals or whatever if they're police officers, which I don't know what answer they're expecting to hear, really. But Smiles tried it as well, didn't he?
He did. The only two challenges we ever received was one from Smiles. After we'd been there quite some time, we gave him a lift one day from Lampeter back to the village, Llandough Brefi, and no sooner had he jumped in. You know, he's very cunning, Smiles, you know. He didn't jump in, break the ice, and then kind of ask in a wishy-washy way. You know, as soon as you jumped in, he came out with it straight away. And it's not really asking. The way they do it, and it is common, the way they do it, it's put as an accusation, not really as a question, although it sounds like a question. It's more of an investigation, and it's to see how you react. And as you say, the one thing that you can't say, there are a number of ways to deal with that situation. And the one thing that is not open to you is to say, yes, I am, stating the obvious. So I don't know. Well, I understand why they do it, trying to put myself in their shoes. And I suppose they're intrigued to see the reaction. And with Smiles, I just laughed it off straight away. And so did Eric. And yeah, that's the funny thing as well about working undercover with a partner. I know how I'm going to react, and I know how I think. But you're thinking, oh my God, how's Eric going to react? But he was fine. You know, he kind of, I think I reacted first by laughing away because Eric was driving. I was sat squashed up in the middle, and Smiles was next to the door to my left. And I kind of laughed at him. And within seconds, he was selling drugs to, I better not mention her name. Her name's in the book. But I won't mention it for the podcast. She was a well-known singer in the 1970s, and he was on about in the days back in Birmingham when he used to sell her drugs and various other things about drugs. He started talking about almost immediately. Smiles was like that, you know. He lived on his wits. He wanted to know who people were, especially if they were total strangers. By this time, of course, we weren't, but he just couldn't resist it. And he loved pushing buttons and see how people reacted. You know, it's an act of self-preservation, isn't it, really? I can understand it.
Yeah, I think the stories I've heard and been a part of, it's, as you say, it's just trying to drop it on your toes, see what happens, not expecting you to turn around and say, yes, I am an undercover police officer. But it makes them feel better when you say you're not, I think. Well, if that's the right way of putting it.
Yeah. In essence, I think that's right. I think to analyse it just very briefly and a little bit more, I think it's like what I just said is that, number one, they're curious, you know, so that's why they put the question stroke accusation to you. But the real thing is they're gauging, they're assessing your response, your demeanour, your body language. He was clearly relaxed in our company. And the classic example, of course, is when he and his partner, Mary, permitted Eric to babysit one night. Well, excuse me, if you've got any serious suspicions that somebody is an undercover police officer, that's the last thing in the world that you're going to do. Let them stay alone with your kids in your house. Excuse me, no. It's it doesn't make sense, does it? You know, I like the guy. You know, I got very close to him, and there was one particular night where Eric and I were sat cross-legged in Smiles' home, and I got to like the guy so much, and I kind of feeling a guilt trip, because I know one day that this guy's going to be busted and he's going to lose everything, his wife, his home, his kids, everything, because he's going to face some serious time in prison. And, you know, I really did come, in my head, I really did come very, very close. I was actually debating whether to tip him off. I know that sounds awful to some people. But, you have to put yourself, or try and put yourself in my shoes. It's all very well being critical, but unless you're there, which I was obviously, and living this lie, and I got very close to the guy. I really did like him immensely. Anyway, I didn't tip him off. I would have been a pariah throughout the police force. That wasn't the only reason. I guess some kind of inner strength, inner honesty told me, don't be so stupid, you can't do that, and I didn't. So yeah, there were a lot of incidents. We had some good fun, we had some good laughs, some good times together, and he was fun company. I enjoyed his company.
When Sally and I visited the area, spoke to a lot of the residents in the New Inn and around about, obviously it was quite a long time ago when you did your role as an undercover officer, but they still speak very openly about what happened, and nobody, and it was made quite clear to us, nobody had a bad word to say about Smiles and the other people involved, although they did what they did, which was totally illegal, and they got sent to prison for it. They were obviously well-liked people, and that's what you are portraying.
Yeah, that's right. And of course, Smiles was known to virtually everybody in that village and in the surrounding area. And he was a very generous guy. Happy, who I've mentioned, Smiles left us one day. I'm sure we were in the New Inn, and Smiles left us in the New Inn one day, and he was off to Lampeter. And the reason he was off to Lampeter was to go and buy Happy a brand new television set, a big colour jobby, which would have set him back even in 1976. Well, I don't know. It's hard for me to recall what the prices were. But let's put it this way: it wouldn't have been cheap, and that was typical Smiles. Very, very, very generous, and a very likable guy. He had oodles of charisma. Really did. I think I've said to somebody in the past, and I'll say it again now. If he hadn't been a drug dealer, he would have made a marvelous television personality. He's really got oodles of charisma about him. A very charming man, good-looking man, funny, witty, excellent company. What else can I say? No wonder I liked him. I liked him a hell of a lot.
Police officers are humans, and they have human instincts and human emotions. That doesn't necessarily mean to say that they act on those instincts or emotions or do their jobs less professionally. But it's naive to think that they aren't there. And I think that's what Stephen found, that he quite liked Smiles and the other associates.
Yes, it happens in everyday life, doesn't it? We've seen it many times, but in this particular case, Smiles and all the other characters at the top of the tree, if we put it that way, in Operation Julie, were professional people. There were chemists, there were doctors, wasn't there? A GP, the lady was a GP. And all the other characters below, including Smiles, were just everyday nice guys who hit on the fact that you could make money out of drugs and have a good lifestyle and live in a secluded place in Wales where you could integrate in and have a jolly good time, as he did. And that's what Stephen walked into, wasn't it?
Yeah, and sometimes criminals that are charismatic, they will commit a particular kind of crime because their charisma and charm plays to utilise that gift, for want of a better word. And certainly when you think about con men, we've heard all this about romance fraud, where people are drawn in online and over many, many months they converse with this charismatic person, and they're drawn into it, and they believe everything that they're being told, mainly because they're talking to somebody who's believable and feasible and a very charismatic person. And then that person will come with, oh, my daughter or my mother has got a serious illness and I've got to pay for care. I've got to pay for an operation. And then the person on this end starts sending out money. And before you know it, their whole savings have been spirited away. And it's just a scam. But the point is that because they have got a big personality, a charismatic personality, they can bring people into that, their way of thinking, and getting them to part with lots of money or assets.
Well, it comes down to everyday life, doesn't it? That every day people throughout the whole world meet other people who immediately they'll take to because they like them, the way they present themselves, the whatever they're trying to tell you or sell you in a salesman's case. If you can cross that barrier into somebody liking you, you're halfway there to selling them something. And that's what these people do, don't they? The Smiles of the world and the con people and all the other criminals that we can talk about. If you can be pleasant and take money off people for whatever you're doing, it's far better than being nasty and robbing people, which also happens, doesn't it?
Yeah, and there's something very different to somebody dashing into a bank and sticking a sawn-off shotgun up the cashier's nose saying, give me all your money, and then running out with it. There's something very different about that to what you're, and we keep using the word charismatic, but what your likeable villain does, in that it's over a period of time, it draws you in and you get to like that person, and that's why you do what they ask you to do.
Yeah, I mean, everybody's heard of a likeable rogue, haven't they?
That's right, yeah.
And of course, that's what a lot of them are. They are likeable people. They've chosen the career path they've chosen, and we chose the police route. And there's a very fine line, I think, between the two sides. You know, a lot of the people I've been involved with would make very good policemen because they've got that charisma, that ability, that pleasantness about them that people will believe them and take them on board. And of course, you know, when you meet people that you've dealt with in the past, very often they say, I wish I'd have been in the police. And it's a sort of a meeting of minds, isn't it? One's on one side, one's on the other. And if you get on with each other, both do the job, and if they win, they win. If they lose, and we win. And that's the way it works, isn't it?
Can you remember we were walking in the city one day, we were coming across the marketplace, and we were going back to the car, and walking towards us was a very tall, slim, well-dressed, middle-aged man who stopped and sort of said, hi, John, how are you? And you had a bit of a chat, and he seemed very nice. It was nobody that I knew, but after about 5 minutes, you said cheerio to him, and he walked off, and we went heading back to the car again. And I said to you, who was that then? And you said, that's Mr. Euro Reversible Trouser Buttons, which was
the nickname
that you gave him when you arrested him. And he did go to prison for stealing a lot of money off a lot of people. And the reason we called him Mr. Euro Reversible Trouser Button was if there ever was such a thing, he would be able to flog them.
And people would buy them.
And people would buy them.
And that's how he operated.
The likeable rogue.
Likeable rogue. And, you know, he bore no grudge and vice versa. He did what he did and he had to serve his prison sentence for it. But deep down, he was a nice guy.
And it's a shame some of these people, you know, your likeable rogues, that they don't put their persuasive talents to better use. But I think there's two reasons why people commit that kind of crime, and one's boredom and the other one is greed.
I mean, the people I recall, most of your good professional criminals, and there is some very good professional criminals, very clever people, as in this case, you've got people who are highly educated, and a lot of it boils down to the fact that they're bored or whatever they're doing, and they don't want to work 9-5 Monday to Friday. They want excitement, and excitement is the thrill of the chase, really. They like the thrill of what they're doing, selling or dealing in whatever it is to make money, and we like it because we're the thrill of the chase to catch them. And when you get the two people meet, very often you're on the same page. One's a criminal, one's a cop, but the same basic human instinct.
It's a battle of wits, isn't it?
Battle of wits. And I always say it's like being on the chessboard. You move all the pieces around, and whoever knocks the king or queen over, whichever it is, wins. And that's how it is.
It appears you know more about crime than you do chess.
Probably.
Just turning back our attention back to undercover work, there are officers who have lived undercover, and they've done things like infiltrate protest groups or political factions, non-violent type groups. But then there are also officers who have gone undercover to infiltrate terrorist groups or very violent groups. And there has been occasions when they have actually blown their own cover and told them the true identity. And that is one very, very risky business, isn't it?
It happens because cops are human beings, aren't they? Same as anybody else is. And if the other side is more persuasive and charismatic than you are and persuades you that they're right and you're wrong and you fall for it or you actually genuinely believe in it, it happens. And the case I think you're mentioning is one of the protest groups, wasn't it, that was infiltrated by these undercover cops, which is all being aired in this inquiry that's going on in London. And having been embedded and infiltrated them for so long, he actually believed himself in what they were trying to fight for. They weren't violent people in as much they were disruptive to companies that they were against, but deep down he sided with them and in the end came out, didn't he, and said, I'm actually an undercover cop and I want to join you.
Yeah, and I think for the people, for the groups that is infiltrated and the individuals that is met, that must seem like the betrayals firsthand. I mean, how do you accept someone in the future who you have thought has genuinely liked you as a person, or had a relationship with you, or had children with you, and then all of a sudden you find out actually he's not the person that you thought he was. He is a cop. How do you bolt those two parts together?
I mean, as observers looking in, you don't see the chemistry that's gone before them and the group that they're involved in. And as far as I'm aware, that particular case, that although they were horrified, they actually sympathised. And of course, he did actually, well, he had to leave the job because it was a mess, as it turned out. But basically, his thoughts were with them, and I think he's still in contact with them.
I mean, the whole undercover policing thing, I know it's something that really interests us, and we keep harping on about that. But because it is such a huge subject and it's such a controversial subject and it's so topical, with this undercover inquiry going on at the same time, that should be a project that we come back to and that we expand upon more and bring back to the podcast when we've researched it more thoroughly.
Yeah, I mean, we've always been interested in it. I mean, as I've mentioned, we collect books. I read extensively on policing, undercover policing, espionage, which is the same thing, really. It's all undercover work, whether it's police or government work or whatever. And it's all been going on since time began. It's happened all the way through history, and it'll go on forevermore, because deep down, that is the only way to find out what's really happening in government or criminal worlds, is to infiltrate them and see what is actually going on. Although this inquiry is going on, I think things will change and improvements will be made, but the actual basic principle will go on forever.
Yeah, I'm sure you're right. It does give me, it does worry me at times, though, when I think about the things that we're researching for podcasts and the searches that we put into the internet. If ever GCHQ were watching us, we're looking at espionage, undercover policing, murders, criminality, all those kind of things. If anybody was looking at what we look at, they'd probably wonder what we're doing.
Yeah. Well,
and not something as easy or as simple as a podcast.
Unless you've been in that situation where you're truly living a double life and living a lie, and if you get close to somebody who's on the other side, you know, it's a very, very difficult role. It really is. And it does something to your head.
I think everything we've heard so far just goes to show that undercover policing's not easy. Certainly in the 1970s, when there was no training whatsoever for undercover officers like Stephen, it took a cool character to put yourself in the position that Stephen put himself in.
Yes, I mean, Stephen says himself, doesn't he, that it was a steep learning curve, and they learnt basically on the job after a bit of initial discussions more than training, and he picked it up. But Stephen's a bright man, isn't he? He's an intelligent man, as we know. So he could bluff his way and make the pieces fit quite easily, I think.
But I think it was his whole character as well, the coolness of him, being able to get out of the situations or explain away situations once he's been put on the spot. And we've heard Stephen talk about meeting Smiles and the others, forging relationships with those who he knows will eventually, on the evidence that he produces, will be arrested and no doubt going to spend some significant amount of time in prison.
Yeah, I mean, the object of the whole undercover role is to obtain evidence that you can put before a court, isn't it? That's what it's about, and also establishing who's involved, who the characters are, but ultimately it's obtaining evidence that can be used eventually to convict these people.
And how do you come to terms with that? How do you, as an officer, feel about what you have done in this case to bring a drug network out into the open and to close it down? But then how do you feel as a person about the way in which you've done that? That's two very different feelings inside one head, isn't it?
Well, I think if you analyse what happened, I mean, Stephen and Eric went undercover, and the basic principle of undercover policing is to obtain evidence to convict people, isn't it? That's what you perform that role for. Also to identify other people in the network that you don't know, but the ultimate aim is to gain evidence, and that's what every police officer generally does anyway, isn't it? That's what we're there for. But in this occasion and this type of role is that you actually befriending and associating and having a lot to do with these people, and clearly Stephen admits, and I'm sure Smiles would if they ever met again, that they actually got on well together, they liked each other, and both were doing their roles, their side of the fence. And if they met in a pub today, I'm sure they'd have a few pints, because they did like to drink quite a lot of pints. But they'd have a few pints and a reminisce about old times and a laugh and all the rest of it, like two old buddies meeting for the first time in many years, wouldn't they?
It's a fine line.
Very fine.
Anyway, we'd just like to say to everybody, thank you for listening. We're always happy for people to support us and join us in every episode. The next one, which will be our fourth episode, the fourth and final episode, we'll be joining Stephen for the very final interview of this series, and we'll be talking about all the intelligence that has been gathered and how he plans and goes ahead with those final raids.
Which is the culmination of the whole operation.
We'd also like to tell you about an exciting new event that we're both involved in, and that's CrimeCon UK, the world's #1 true crime event. And it's coming to London on June the 12th and 13th of 2021. You can get inside the mind of serial killers and psychopaths. You can learn from leading criminologists, hear from the families and survivors, meet your favourite true crime podcasters, immerse yourself in forensic science and delve deeper into unsolved crimes.
CrimeCon is the ultimate true crime weekend, partnered by Crime and Investigation. We'll both be there alongside other amazing true crime podcasters. So why not come, talk to us and ask us questions about this show and the different subjects we've covered.
The tickets are on sale now, and we have an exclusive offer where you can get 10% off the ticket price when you use the code INVESTIGATORS at the checkout. So for more information about getting your ticket, visit crimecon.co.uk. But before that event in June, join us both again for the final part of our Operation Julie investigation, and that'll be in 2 weeks' time. So please stay subscribed and join us again to hear how the story ends and what happened to Stephen when it was all over.
Thank you for taking the time to listen to the True Crime Investigators UK podcast. This show was researched, produced and presented by John and Sally. The narrator was Richard Ashwell. It was edited and produced for Cornucopia Radio by Peter Beeston. The excerpt at the start of this episode was taken from Undercover, Operation Julie, The Inside Story by Stephen Bentley, and was used with the kind permission of Stephen Bentley and Worldmark Films Limited for exclusive use on this podcast. We are asked to advise that any further use of any part of the excerpts by any means whatsoever is not permissible. You can find out more information and case notes about Operation Julie by visiting our website at truecrimeinvestigators.co.uk. On the website, you'll also be able to send us messages, discover subscription links for all podcast platforms, and follow us on all our social media accounts. Make sure you subscribe to this feed so you can automatically get new regular episodes as soon as we release them. And also, if you enjoy the series, we'd really appreciate you leaving a review or star rating in your favourite podcast application. Your support will help us grow and expand our true crime investigations even further. Thank you.